3 days. That was the limit. No gems, no donations, no shortcuts, no lucky credit card moments, just pure gameplay and patience in a game where patience usually dies somewhere around the third lost match. The goal was simple and completely insane at the same time: unlock the newest legendary brawler, Pierce, using only progression, quests, star points, and smart mode selection. I started this challenge knowing one thing for sure: Brawl Stars doesn't care about your plans. RNG doesn't care about your motivation. And legendary brawlers especially don't care about deadlines. Day 1 started in Showdown, the most raw and unforgiving mode in the game, officially called Solo Showdown, where 10 players spawn on the same map, collect power cubes to increase damage and health, and slowly realize that trust does not exist. Showdown is not about aim, it's about positioning, timing, and knowing when not to fight, because every unnecessary fight is just free progress for someone else. I played slow, using bushes, corners, and map pressure, letting other players fight while I stayed alive, because placement matters more than kills when you're grinding resources. Every top 4 finish meant more consistency, more quests done, more progress towards star points, and less tilt. After hours of Showdown, I switched to Gem Grab, one of the oldest and most strategic modes in Brawl Stars, where 2 teams fight over gems spawning from the center mine, and the real objective isn't killing enemies, but controlling space. Fun fact, Gem Grab was the first permanent 3v3 mode ever added to the game, and it teaches players something most modes don't: retreating with gems is often more important than pushing for kills. Here I played more controlled brawlers and focused on mid-control, understanding that one lost fight at the wrong moment can flip an entire match. From there I moved into Heist, a mode built around pure damage efficiency, where each team protects a safe while trying to destroy the enemies. Heist punishes bad positioning harder than almost any other mode because one mistake can cost you 20% of your safe instantly. This is where damage dealers shine and where understanding timing matters more than raw aggression. Later in the rotation came Siege, officially known as Siege Mode, a mode that no longer exists in competitive rotation but remains one of the most mechanically complex concepts Brawl Stars ever introduced. In Siege, teams collect bolts that spawn on the map to power an IK turret, which then deploys a robot to attack the enemy base, and what most players don't realize is that bolt control early often matters more than defending later. Siege taught me discipline, because overcommitting early almost always leads to losing the final robot push. While grinding, I rotated between specific brawlers for efficiency. Otis was one of my core picks, a mythic brawler known for his unique silence mechanic, which prevents enemies from attacking or using supers, making him extremely strong in objective-based modes. Otis is especially effective in tight spaces where his paint projectiles can control choke points and shut down aggressive pushes. Penny was another key pick, a brawler who thrives on area denial thanks to her splash damage and mortar turret, which can pressure enemies even when Penny herself isn't actively fighting. Penny's turret forces opponents to reposition constantly, which makes her surprisingly strong in Heist and Gem Grab when placed correctly behind walls. Shade, on the other hand, brought mobility and surprise factor, allowing quick engagements and escapes, and while not the easiest brawler mechanically, Shade rewards players who understand timing rather than brute force. Throughout the grind, megquests played a massive role, because megquests are designed to accelerate progression by forcing you into different modes and brawlers, often rewarding players who are flexible instead of stubborn. Star points slowly accumulated, match by match, quest by quest, loss by loss, because even losses contribute when you play consistently. And here's an interesting fact most casual players ignore: legendary brawler drop chances in Brawl Stars increase the longer you go without unlocking one, meaning persistence is literally part of the system design. Pierce, as the newest legendary, represents that late-game aspiration, the reward for players who stick with the grind rather than skip it with money. By the end of the 3rd day, every match felt heavier, every box opening felt slower, and every animation felt like it lasted longer than it actually did, because anticipation changes perception. And that's the real challenge of Brawl Stars: not mechanics, not aim, not even teamwork, but mental endurance. Staying focused while grinding, adapting to modes like Showdown, Gem Grab, Heist, and Siege, understanding how brawlers like Otis, Penny, and Shade function in different environments, and trusting the system enough to believe that the legendary unlock will eventually happen. This wasn't about luck. This was about playing the game the way it was designed to be played, slowly, strategically, and without shortcuts, pushing through frustration until progression finally catches up with effort. As the hours kept stacking, something changed mentally, because Brawl Stars isn't just a fast mobile shooter, it's a game designed around pressure and repetition either breaks you or sharpens you. By the middle of day 2, muscle memory had fully kicked in, movements became automatic, aiming stopped being a conscious decision, and positioning started to feel like instinct. That's when you realize that modes like Showdown aren't random at all, they're psychological, because players who panic push die early, while players who wait usually survive longer, and survival is progress. In Solo Showdown especially, the map itself becomes a weapon, bushes aren't cover, they're information control, and every sound cue tells a story about who is fighting, who is low, and who is about to third party. At that point, grinding stopped feeling like farming and started feeling like reading the lobby. Switching back into gem grab felt smoother because once you understand map flow, controlling the gem mine becomes less about fighting and more about denying angles. A little known fact about gem grab is that the countdown doesn't care about how many enemies are alive, it only cares about possession, which means sometimes the smartest play is doing absolutely nothing and letting the timer run while enemies self-destruct trying to force a fight. Heist continued to be a mental endurance test, because Heist punishes hesitation just as much as overextension, and learning when to commit damage and when to fall back is what separates wins from frustrating 1% safe losses. Siege, despite its complexity, actually trained macro awareness, because bolt spawn timing creates invisible objectives that good players track subconsciously, and once you start predicting bolt cycles, the mode feels less chaotic and more like controlled escalation. Throughout this process, Otis proved why silence mechanics are so strong in objective modes, because shutting down supers at the right moment can completely erase an enemy push without needing raw damage. Penny's value kept increasing the longer matches went, since her turret forces enemy movement even when no shots are fired, which is something newer players underestimate. Pressure without interaction is still pressure. Shade's mobility became crucial in clutch situations, especially when matches reached overtime and map control shrank, because being able to reposition instantly can turn a losing fight into a reset instead of a wipe. The star points kept climbing slowly, not explosively, but consistently, and consistency is exactly what legendary progression systems are built around. Another thing most players don't realize is that Brawl Stars subtly encourages long sessions through quest stacking, meaning the more modes you touch in one sitting, the more efficient your overall progression becomes. By the end of day 2, every box opening felt heavier, because anticipation stretches time, and every failed pull made Pierce feel more distant even though mathematically the odds were improving. That's the psychological trick of loot systems, they make progress invisible until it suddenly isn't. Day 3 started differently, because the pressure was no longer about grinding, it was about closure. At that point, I wasn't just playing matches, I was finishing a story I had already committed to. Showdown matches felt tighter, gem grab rotations felt faster, and heist games became all or nothing, because when you're close to a goal, every small loss feels bigger than it actually is. The funny part is that Pierce himself represents exactly that design philosophy, a legendary brawler meant to feel unreachable until the moment he isn't, rewarding persistence rather than impulse. Legendary brawlers in Brawl Stars aren't just stronger, they're symbolic, they exist to mark time spent in the game, and unlocking one without spending money feels fundamentally different because it validates effort instead of purchase. By the time the final boxes were lined up, the grind had already paid off mentally, because even before the unlock, the challenge had done its job, turning 3 days of repetitive gameplay into a structured progression journey. Whether Pierce appeared in that final moment or not, the system had already proven something important. In Brawl Stars, patience scales just as hard as damage does, and players who understand modes, brawlers, and timing will always progress eventually, even in a game built around randomness. At some point during the grind, numbers stopped meaning anything, trophies blurred together, star points felt abstract, and matches stopped being individual games and turned into a single continuous session, which is exactly how long-term progression systems are designed to feel. Brawl Stars rewards momentum more than peaks, and momentum only exists when you stop emotionally reacting to every win or loss. In Showdown, I noticed patterns repeating themselves, the same early fights in the center, the same mid-game standoffs near power cube spawns, the same late-game circles where 3 players hesitate and one mistake decides everything. Understanding that rhythm made survival almost mechanical, because when you know when fights usually happen, you also know when not to be there. In Gem Grab, teamwork without communication became its own skill, reading teammate movement, predicting retreats, and knowing when someone is about to drop gems without them needing to signal it. That's one of the quiet skills Brawl Stars teaches, situational awareness in chaos. Heist continued to punish impatience, because chasing kills in Heist is one of the fastest ways to lose a safe, and the best Heist players aren't the ones with the highest KDA, but the ones who know exactly how much damage they can deal before disappearing. Siege once again proved why it was both loved and hated, because its complexity forced players to think several minutes ahead, not just seconds, and when both teams understood the mode, matches felt like controlled tension instead of randomness. Otis kept shining as a control pick, because silence changes fights without being visually explosive. It doesn't look flashy, but it wins games quietly. Penny's kit kept scaling with enemy mistakes, since clustered teams turn her splash damage into free value, and her turret doesn't need perfect aim to influence the map, it just needs time. Shade, meanwhile, became the safety net, the brawler that could fix bad situations, escape pressure, or force enemies to split attention, which is invaluable during long grind sessions where mistakes are inevitable. One of the most interesting things about grinding without spending money is how it changes perception, because instead of thinking about what you don't have, you start optimizing what you do have, and that mindset shift alone makes progression feel faster. Legendary progression in Brawl Stars isn't just a number, it's a psychological checkpoint, a moment where effort turns into ownership. By late day 3, the anticipation was no longer excitement, it was tension, because expectation creates weight, and weight makes every animation feel slower. Every box opening sequence felt stretched, every pause between rewards felt intentional, as if the game itself was aware of the moment. And even though the system is mathematical, probability doesn't feel mathematical when you're inside it, it feels personal. That's the strange magic of Brawl Stars, it turns numbers into emotion. By that stage, the challenge had already succeeded, because it proved that playing smart, rotating modes like Showdown, Gem Grab, Heist, and Siege, choosing brawlers based on role instead of hype, and staying consistent over time creates real progress, even when the reward hasn't appeared yet. Pierce wasn't just a brawler at that point, he was the symbol of the grind itself, the final punctuation mark on 3 days of focused play, and whether he showed up in the next box or the one after that, the outcome was already decided the moment the challenge started. Fatigue slowly became part of the background, not something to fight, but something to move with, because long grinds aren't about staying energized, they're about staying stable. In Brawl Stars, stability means not tilting after a bad matchup, not overcorrecting after a loss, and not chasing wins like they're owed to you. Showdown continued to reward restraint, because the later the match goes, the more valuable patience becomes, and the final circles are usually decided by positioning rather than firepower. Players with more cubes still lose if they panic, and players with fewer cubes still win if they wait for the right moment, which makes Showdown one of the purest expressions of decision-making in the game. Gem Grab reinforced a different lesson, that control is temporary and mistakes compound fast, because one drop gem carrier can reverse an entire match in seconds. There's a quiet tension in Gem Grab that most players don't consciously register, the constant calculation of whether to push, retreat, or simply hold ground, and mastering that rhythm is what turns average players into reliable ones. Heist continued to feel brutal, because Heist doesn't forgive tunnel vision, and every second spent chasing an enemy is a second not spent damaging or protecting a safe. Siege once again highlighted how Brawl Stars experiments with macro mechanics, because bolt control creates invisible pressure that forces players to make decisions before they even see the consequences, and understanding that timing separates experienced players from casual ones. Otis remained the definition of control, because silence is strongest when it's unexpected, turning aggressive enemies into spectators for just long enough to swing fights. Penny continued to reward foresight, since placing her turret early in the right spot can influence an entire match without needing constant interaction. Shade stayed valuable in late-game situations, where mobility and unpredictability become more important than raw stats. As the grind continued, something else became clear: progression without spending money creates a different relationship with the game, because instead of skipping frustration, you learn how to minimize it. You start recognizing which maps favor which playstyles, which modes are efficient for certain quests, and which brawlers provide the most value per match rather than the most highlights. That awareness compounds over time, turning what looks like slow progress into inevitable progress. Legendary brawlers like Pierce are designed to sit at the end of that curve, not as power spikes, but as milestones, proof that time invested eventually converts into results. By this stage, the challenge had transformed from a simple unlock attempt into a demonstration of how Brawl Stars is meant to be played when stripped of shortcuts. The final matches weren't about rushing to the reward anymore, they were about finishing the process cleanly, because when you've committed to a grind, how you ended matters just as much as whether you succeed. Every rotation through Showdown, Gem Grab, Heist, and Siege reinforced the same conclusion, that patience, adaptability, and consistency outperform impulse every single time. Pierce was no longer just the end goal, he was the natural consequence of staying in the system long enough for effort to catch up with probability, and at that point, the unlock felt less like luck and more like closure. Pierce is not a flashy brawler, he's not the kind of legendary you unlock and immediately feel like a god in the lobby. He's a calculated, methodical character built around control, zoning, and punishing mistakes. His main attack is precise and requires timing rather than spamming, and that alone makes him feel very different from legendaries like Stu or Bell who reward aggression and constant action. Pierce thrives in objective modes where map awareness matters, where placement, patience, and reading your opponent are more important than raw damage output. His super adds a layer of pressure without being obvious. It forces enemies to reposition or lose momentum, and players who understand that will find themselves quietly winning fights that feel like they were almost lost. That subtle dominance is exactly why he fits perfectly as the reward for a challenge focused on grind and consistency, because he's designed for people who think, not just react, and that makes him simultaneously interesting and divisive. Some players will love the way he changes the pacing of the match, appreciating that every attack matters, while others will find him slow or underwhelming compared to flashy legendaries, but that's intentional, because Pierce isn't about spectacle, he's about mastery, about proving that understanding positioning, timing, and control can be as rewarding as pulling off impossible shots. His lore fits the same philosophy. He's not a loud cartoon hero, he's calculated, grounded, a presence that influences the map without shouting, which matches his kit perfectly. In terms of strengths, he excels at punishing grouped enemies, controlling choke points, surviving longer than most legendaries in skilled hands, and turning minor positional errors into major advantages. On the downside, he requires understanding of the map and modes. Players who rush or ignore spacing will get frustrated quickly. His power peaks in modes like Gem Grab, Heist, and Siege where control matters more than raw kills, less so in chaotic showdown situations where fast action can overwhelm him if you're inexperienced. The design choice here is interesting because it rewards the grind already demanded, which creates a narrative link between the challenge and the brawler himself. Pierce isn't just a reward, he's almost a statement about how Brawl Stars can reward thoughtful play. It's the opposite of a brawler you spam to win, it's a brawler you earn the ability to master, and that's exactly why, after 3 days of playing slowly, positioning carefully, rotating through Showdown, Gem Grab, Heist, and Siege, Pierce appearing at the end feels both satisfying and meaningful. It validates the grind in a way that flashy loot boxes never could. So the question, is he fun, depends entirely on the player. If you enjoy outplaying opponents quietly and controlling space strategically, he's amazing. If you want constant explosions and action, he might